A woman in a red dress stands before the door to freedom, and the man stopping her isn't her enemy. He's the only one trying to keep her alive. On a rainy Chicago night, Ivy Hale is about to walk into the trap of the man who killed her brother, unknowingly. And Roman Versetti, the man she hates most in the world, must choose between eternal silence or uncovering all the secrets he's buried for the past 2 years. Follow this story to the end. Hit like and leave the city you're watching in so I know how far my story has progressed. The rain started around 9. Not the gentle kind that washed streets clean and made people nostalgic. This was Chicago rain, hard and horizontal and mean, the kind that drove itself beneath coat collars and into bones, and reminded you that this city had never cared about comfort. It slapped against the tall glass panels of the Blackthorn estate and ran down in dark rivulets, blurring the lights of the distant skyline into something that looked almost beautiful if you didn't know what paid for the view. Ivy Hale stood at the top of the grand staircase and hated the dress. Not because it wasn't beautiful. It was. Crimson silk, backless, cut with the kind of precision that cost money she didn't have and wouldn't have accepted if she did. It had arrived in a black box with a card printed in her brother's handwriting. For tonight, wear something that makes you feel alive. E. She'd read the note 4 times in her room, pressing the paper flat against her palm, tracing each letter like she could absorb proof of him through her skin. She hadn't seen Elias in 3 years, hadn't heard his voice in 2. And now, suddenly, text messages. Then a phone call, crackling and brief, but unmistakably him. He'd used their childhood name for each other, Little Sparrow. Nobody else on earth knew that name. Nobody. So she'd put on the dress. She'd found a silk purse, red, ridiculous, completely impractical, and she'd done her hair and her face the way their mother used to when they were small, and she'd felt, for the first time in what felt like a century, something close to hope. That was the thing about hope. It made you stupid. The staircase descended into the entry hall, and the entry hall was all black marble and low lighting, and the particular silence that expensive houses built specifically to make regular people feel small. Ivy had worked in this house for 12 months. She knew every room, every routine, every silent rule that kept the household running without friction. She knew which staff members came and went, which doors were always locked, which parts of the estate she was never to enter without an explicit invitation. She knew Roman Versetti's schedule down to the half hour. Tuesday nights, he held meetings in the lower study until 11. She had until 10:45, at minimum, to walk out the front door, meet the car she'd called, and be halfway to the restaurant before anyone noticed she was gone. She had 11 minutes. She descended the stairs at a pace she was trying very hard to keep steady. The entry hall was empty. The front door was 40 feet away. She was going to make it. "Where exactly do you think you're going?" The voice came from the hallway to her left. The dark one. The one that led back through the west wing and shouldn't have had anyone in it at this hour. Ivy's hand closed around the brass door handle before her brain fully processed the words, and for one reckless second she almost kept going, almost pretended she hadn't heard, almost made the choice to run and deal with the consequences later. Then Roman Versetti stepped out of the dark, and every coherent thought she had disintegrated. He was in a white dress shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, collar open at the throat. No jacket, no tie. The geometric tattoos that ran from his wrists up his forearms were dark against pale skin in the dim light, and he moved the way he always moved. Like violence was only ever one breath away. Like his body had made peace with that fact so completely that it had stopped trying to look like anything other than what it was. His dark eyes found her in the low light and stayed there, and for a moment his face did something she'd never seen it do before. It went completely still. Not the controlled stillness of a man accustomed to hiding his reactions. Something else. Something that looked involuntary and uncomfortable. The way a person looks when they've been unexpectedly hurt by something they didn't see coming. He looked at the dress the way a man looks at a thing he recognizes as dangerous. Then his jaw tightened and the moment closed over like water over a stone, and he was just Roman Versetti again. Cold, immovable, and in her way. "I asked you a question," he said. "I heard you." Ivy's voice came out steadier than she deserved credit for. She kept her hand on the door handle. "I'm going out." "You're going out." "That's what I said." Roman crossed his arms, not threateningly, just with the particular patience of a man who had no concept of urgency because nothing in his life had ever been permitted to move faster than he decided it would. "Where?" he said. Not a question anymore. "I'm meeting someone." "Who?" "My brother." The word landed between them, and she watched him absorb it. Watched something move behind his eyes, quick and dark, there and then gone. "I haven't seen him in a long time, and he's in the city, and I'm going to meet him. I have the night off. I'm not violating any agreement, and I don't need your permission." The last part came out harder than she'd planned. Roman didn't react to the edge in her voice. He never did. He had the maddening quality of a man who'd been yelled at by people considerably more frightening than her, and her anger simply didn't register as relevant. He uncrossed his arms slowly. "You don't have a brother anymore." The sentence hit her in the sternum. "What did you just say to me?" Roman moved. Not toward her, toward the wall panel beside the hallway entrance. His palm pressed against it and something clicked and the panel opened, and behind it was a corridor she hadn't known existed, and his expression had changed into something she had no language for. Something that was not cold. Something that looked impossibly like fear. "Come with me," he said. "I'm not going anywhere with you. I'm leaving." Her grip on the door handle tightened. "My brother is waiting. Your brother is dead." The rain hammered the glass. Ivy's world went sideways. "He's been dead for 2 years," Roman said, and his voice had dropped to something almost quiet, which was somehow worse than if he'd shouted. "The man waiting for you at that restaurant tonight is not Elias Hale. He has never met Elias Hale. He knows one thing about your brother, and that one thing is the nickname he used to call you, and they pulled it out of a man before they killed him." Ivy's lungs stopped working. "You're lying." "I'm not." "You don't know anything about my brother." "I know everything about your brother." Roman's hand moved to the side of the corridor and entrance, bracing there, and he looked at her with those dark eyes that had never once in 12 months held anything she could read, and right now held something she was terrified to name. "That's the problem. Come with me before I have to explain this in the hallway where every camera in this house can record it." He disappeared into the corridor without checking whether she followed. She stood there for 4 full seconds. Then she let go of the door handle. The war room was at the back of the estate, accessible only through the concealed corridor and 2 additional locked doors that Roman opened with a keycard and a code. Ivy had managed the household for a year and hadn't known this room existed. That alone told her more than she wanted to know about how many layers of this house she'd never seen. The room itself was utilitarian and cold. Steel walls, a central table with a built-in display, banks of monitors along one wall showing camera feeds from the perimeter, a weapons locker on the far side that was bolted shut with biometric locks. It smelled like metal and recycled air and something else, cigarette smoke from years past, absorbed into surfaces that didn't breathe. Roman engaged the locks on the door behind them. Then he turned and looked at her, and the careful flatness in his face was doing something it had never done in 12 months of proximity. It was starting to crack. "Sit down," he said. "Tell me what you know about my brother." "Sit down first." "I will stand here all night if I want to. Talk." He studied her for a moment. Then he pulled a chair out from the table and sat in it himself instead of hers, which she hadn't expected, and set both hands flat on the surface in front of him, a gesture she'd seen him use in business meetings, she realized, when he was trying to hold himself to a deliberate pace. 2 years ago, he said, Elias Hale died in an ambush outside of Calumet City. He had been working as a paid informant for my organization for 16 months prior to that night, feeding intelligence on a trafficking syndicate called Volkov that had been operating in the Midwest for a decade. He wasn't a criminal. He came to me voluntarily. He had a specific goal in mind. Ivy's hands were shaking. She pressed them against her thighs. "What goal?" Roman looked at her. "You." The silence stretched out. "There was a trafficking contract in circulation under your name," he said. "It had been active since before you aged out of the foster system. Elias found it. He didn't have the resources to buy it out or eliminate it on his own. And he didn't trust law enforcement because 2 of the officers he'd approached about it were already compromised. He found another option." A pause. "He found me." Ivy's throat had tightened to the point where swallowing hurt. "You knew," she said. "You've known about me since before I came to work here." The employment agency that placed you wasn't real, Roman said. I built it. The references, the background check, the recommendation letters, all constructed. I needed you inside the estate because inside the estate is the safest single location in northern Illinois for someone whose name is on a syndicate contract. The room tilted. For a year, Ivy said slowly, you let me think I was an employee. You let me think I'd gotten this job on my own. You let me... She stopped, swallowed. You've been lying to me for 12 months. Yes. And my brother asked you to do this. Roman's expression didn't shift, but something in it tightened. Your brother died asking me to do this. Those are different things. He stood up then and went to the monitor panel on the wall, pulled up a file she couldn't see the details of from where she was standing, and turned the screen toward her. Personnel photographs, operational records, a syndicate organizational chart that stretched across 2 screens when he expanded it. The man you were going to meet tonight is named Gregor Sorin, Roman said. He runs logistics for the Volkov Syndicate's Midwest cell. He's been coordinating your contact for the last 30 days. The messages were from Elias, his number, his SIM spoofing. It's not complicated to set up. Roman pulled up a side-by-side comparison on the screen. Message logs from her brother's number alongside technical data she didn't fully understand, but the timestamps and metadata told the story clearly enough. They needed to move you out of this estate. You're the most protected you've ever been inside these walls, and they know it. So they created an exit scenario, something emotional enough that you wouldn't stop to question it. Ivy thought about the note in the box. Little Sparrow. Her lungs felt too small. How did they get the nickname? She said. Roman went very still. He crossed the room to the weapons locker, opened a drawer beneath it, and removed a small audio device. He set it on the table between them. He looked at it rather than at her. Because they asked him for it, he said. He pressed play. The recording lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. She knew it was her brother from the first word. Didn't need any preamble or confirmation. She'd know his voice in any condition, at any volume, through any amount of damage. She'd know the particular cadence of how he spoke, the regional softness in certain vowels that was a leftover from their childhood, the way he always paused a half-beat too long before answering a question he didn't want to answer. She knew him, and in 4 minutes and 12 seconds, she listened to him be destroyed. She listened to men demand information in voices that were businesslike and bored, and somehow worse for it. She listened to the sounds that followed when he refused. She listened to him break slowly, incrementally, the way a person breaks when they've decided they will hold as long as they possibly can, because they understand that the moment they don't, something they love will be lost. She listened to him say the name, Little Sparrow, barely audible, barely a breath, but unmistakably him. She listened to the gunshot. Roman stopped the recording. The room was absolutely silent, except for the sound of the rain. Ivy was standing with her back against the wall, and she wasn't sure when she'd moved there, and her face was wet, and she wasn't sure when that had started either. Her hands were flat against the steel panel behind her, and she was pressing them there hard because she needed to feel something solid and real, because the floor had turned to water beneath her, and she was about to go under. Roman didn't say anything. He didn't move toward her. He stood at the table and watched her with those dark eyes, and the expression on his face was the most unguarded thing she'd ever seen on a human being. Layered and painful, and carrying the specific weight of a man who has lived with a thing so long that he's stopped being able to separate it from himself. He was trying to protect you, Roman finally said. His voice was rough. Even at the end. They threatened to take you if he didn't give them something, and he stopped, pressed his mouth flat. He calculated that a nickname gave them less than anything else they might have used. He was wrong, but that was his calculation. He died trying to keep the damage small. Ivy's breath came in ragged pulls. When? She managed. When exactly? November. 2 years ago, November. She had been celebrating. She remembered it. She'd gotten a promotion at the restaurant she'd been working at before the fake employment agency had placed her here, and she'd bought herself a bottle of wine she couldn't afford and sat in her apartment and felt for one evening like things might be going somewhere. November. He died in my arms, Roman said. If that matters to you, I want you to know that he wasn't alone. Something in her chest broke open. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor with her knees drawn up and the crimson silk dress pooled around her, and she put her face in her hands, and for a long time the only sound in the war room was the rain and the particular kind of crying that doesn't have any performance in it, the kind that is just grief running out through available exits. Roman sat down on the floor, not beside her, a few feet away, his back against the table leg, elbows on his knees, looking at the far wall, not crowding her, not trying to comfort her in any physical way she hadn't invited, just present, staying. She didn't know why that made it worse and better simultaneously. Eventually she ran out of air and lifted her face and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and looked at him. "Show me everything," she said. "Whatever you've been keeping. Show me all of it." Roman held her gaze for a moment. Then he stood and went back to the monitors. She was on her feet, crossing to stand beside him, when the first alarm erupted. It came from everywhere at once. Not a single klaxon, but a layered system, each panel in the room suddenly blazing red emergency light, the monitors snapping from their standard camera feeds to threat assessment overlays. Roman's posture transformed between one breath and the next. The grief, or whatever approximation of it had been sitting in him a moment ago, vanished entirely, replaced by something mechanical and immediate and very, very controlled. He went to the weapons locker. "What's happening?" Ivy said. "They tracked you." He was moving through the locker with the efficiency of a man who has done this enough times that his hands know where everything is without looking. A handgun, extra magazines, a radio headset that he pressed into her hand. The dress. She looked down at herself. Roman closed the distance between them in 2 steps and reached for the seam at the side of the dress, at the point where the silk folded back on itself just below her ribs. His fingers found something there, and for a moment his face went so cold it was almost frightening, and then he turned the fabric toward the low emergency light. Tucked into the doubled silk, smaller than a button, was a device blinking slow and steady red. A tracker. Ivy stared at it. "The boutique," she said. "The employee who sold you that dress is dead," Roman said. "She was replaced this morning." He stripped the tracker out of the seam and crushed it under his heel. "Too late. They already have the signal. They know exactly where you are." On the monitors behind him, the perimeter cameras were showing armed figures moving through the rain toward the outer gates. Not 2 men. Not 3. Many. Roman grabbed her wrist, not rough, but definite, no discussion, and pulled her toward the door. "Stay close," he said. "Whatever you see in the next hour, stay close." The estate erupted behind them as they moved, and somewhere in the outer dark, beyond the gates, beyond the rain, the men who had used her dead brother's voice to pull her out of safety were pushing through the perimeter wire with weapons drawn and patience long since exhausted. They weren't coming to talk. And Roman Vercetti, the man she'd spent 12 months believing was the most dangerous thing in her world, was the only reason she might survive the night. The lights went red across every room in the mansion, and somewhere in the chaos, Ivy Hale had no idea that the worst betrayal of the night hadn't come from outside the walls. It had been living beside her the entire time. The first explosion hit the east wing. Not a bomb, a shaped charge on the exterior wall, the kind designed to punch a clean entry point rather than level a structure. Ivy felt it through the soles of her feet before she heard it, a deep, concussive thud that traveled up through the marble floor and into her knees and chest like the house itself had been struck. Dust sifted down from the corridor ceiling. Somewhere above them, something made of glass hit something made of stone and shattered. Roman didn't flinch. He had her by the wrist and he was moving and she was keeping pace because her options were keep pace or get left. And some deep animal part of her brain had bypassed every complicated feeling she had about this man and reduced the situation to its simplest form. He knew this house, and she didn't. He had a weapon, and she didn't. And the people outside were not here to negotiate. "How many?" she said, breathless. "East breach team, probably 4. He pulled her around a corner, checked it first with the practiced lean of someone who did this by reflex. "There'll be a second team at the west service entrance in the next 3 minutes. They're splitting coverage so nobody can consolidate." "How do you know that?" "Because that's how I'd do it." The radio in her hand crackled. A man's voice, clipped and urgent. "East corridor compromised, 2 contacts down, 2 still active, moving toward the interior stairwell." Roman pulled the radio from her and pressed it to his mouth. Hold the stairwell. Nobody gets to the second floor. He released the transmit button. My security team, 6 on site tonight. 6 against how many of them? He didn't answer that, which was its own answer. He moved her through a servant's passage she'd used 100 times to carry linens and breakfast trays, and it looked completely different at this speed, in this light, with the emergency red washing everything into a landscape that belonged to a different world than the one she'd been living in 12 months ago. The low bulbs that lit the passage during the day had been replaced by the red emergency overheads, and every doorway looked like an open wound. Gunfire erupted behind them. 2 shots, close, and then a burst of return fire from further away, and then nothing. Roman, keep moving. Someone just keep moving, Ivy. She kept moving. He brought her to the panic room. She hadn't known it existed either, which was apparently the theme of this entire night, discovering how little of this house she'd actually seen. It was behind the hall linen closet on the ground floor, accessible through a panel that looked like shelving until Roman's thumb pressed the right board in the right sequence and the whole unit swung inward. Inside, a room the size of a large bathroom, reinforced walls, a monitor showing 6 camera feeds, a basic medical kit, water, a locked cabinet she assumed held additional weapons. Roman turned to face her. You stay here, he said. Door locks from the inside. Nobody opens it from the outside without the code and the biometric, and those are both mine, so I'm not staying in a closet. It's not a closet, it's a... I heard you, she said. I'm still not staying. Roman looked at her with the particular expression of a man who has given a reasonable instruction and encountered unreasonable resistance and is recalculating his options. It lasted about 3 seconds. You go anywhere in this house alone tonight, he said. You will die. That is not a threat. It's operational reality. These men are professionals. Then stay with me. I can't stay with you. I have to. Then take me with you. Something moved across his face, brief and sharp like a sliver of light under a closed door. You've never seen what I do, he said. I've already heard it, she said. 12 months of things I pretended not to hear through walls that weren't as thick as you thought they were. Whatever you do tonight, I've already decided I can stand it. She held his gaze. What I cannot stand is sitting in a box not knowing. A burst of static from the radio. A different voice this time, rougher. West service door is down. 3 contacts. We're falling back to... The voice cut off. Not static. Cut off. Roman's jaw tightened. He handed her a small folding knife from the cabinet. Don't use it unless something is already touching you, he said, and stay 2 steps behind me. If I tell you to run, you run. You don't look back, you don't ask where, you just run toward the east stairwell and up to the 2nd floor, and you find the room with the blue light above the door, and you lock yourself inside. Blue light, she repeated. Blue light. He met her eyes. I need to know you'll do that. I'll do it if you need me to. That's not a yes. It's the closest you're getting. Another second of that unreadable look. Then he turned and moved, and she was 2 steps behind him, and the knife was in her hand, and the panic room door swung shut behind them with a sealed, permanent sound that she told herself she was not going to think about. The west corridor was dark, not emergency red dark. Actually dark. The lights had been cut, either by the breach or deliberately, and Roman slowed his pace and moved differently now, lower and more deliberate, one hand trailing the wall, the other holding the handgun at a downward angle. Ivy matched his pace and his posture because instinct told her to, and because the dark was thorough and disorienting, and he was the only fixed point she had. She heard breathing ahead of them. Not Roman's. Someone else's. Shallow and quick. The sound of someone trying to be quiet and not quite managing it. Roman stopped. He turned his head toward her in the dark, and she felt rather than saw his hand find her shoulder and press, very slightly, downward. She went into a crouch without fully understanding why, and 3 seconds later the shadow at the end of the corridor moved and 2 shots split the dark, and the muzzle flash lit the space for a fraction of a second, long enough to see a figure stumble sideways and go down, long enough to see Roman had already moved out of the line of fire. She hadn't even heard him move. He was beside the fallen figure now, checking, moving on. He came back to her in the dark, and his hand found her arm and pulled her upright and forward, and she stepped over something on the floor and made herself not think about what it was. "You okay?" he said quietly. "Yes." "You sure?" "Keep moving." He kept moving. They came out of the west corridor into the kitchen. The estate's main kitchen, large and stainless steel and flooded with the emergency red. And Ivy's first coherent thought was that she knew this room. She'd eaten breakfast in this room every morning for a year. She'd sat on the counter in this room at midnight, unable to sleep, drinking tea she'd made herself and listening to the house settle around her. She knew the sound the refrigerator made at 3 in the morning, and the way the window above the sink let in a specific quality of pre-dawn light in late autumn. She knew the woman who ran this kitchen. Martha Cole was standing at the far end of the room. She was 63 years old. She had gray hair. She kept pinned back in reading glasses she wore on a beaded chain around her neck, and she made a chicken soup that Ivy had once told her could solve problems that therapy couldn't. She had called Ivy sweetheart on her second day in the house and had never stopped. She had sat with her through a particularly bad bout of insomnia in February and talked about her garden in Wisconsin until Ivy fell asleep in the kitchen chair. Martha was standing at the far end of the room with a cell phone in her hand, and the phone had a number on the screen that Ivy didn't recognize, and Martha was looking at her with an expression that contained not one trace of the warmth Ivy had spent 12 months believing in. The phone dropped to her side. "Ivy?" Martha said. Her voice was steady. That was the worst part. "I'm so sorry you're seeing this." Ivy's brain refused the information for a full 3 seconds. Then it accepted it all at once, and the sensation was like cold water replacing blood. "How long?" Ivy said. Martha didn't answer. "How long, Martha?" "Before you came," Roman said from beside her. His voice was flat and very quiet, and the flatness had an edge in it that was different from anything she'd heard from him before. Something past anger. Something older. "She was already in place before you arrived. She was part of the assessment process." Ivy stared at the older woman. "You were there when I couldn't sleep," she said. "You sat with me." "I know." Martha's voice finally shifted. Not much, but enough. A crack in the steadiness. "I know I did. You made me believe. I know what I did. Did you know about the tracker? Did you know about the dress?" "I didn't know about any of tonight," Martha said, and something heated in her voice. "I passed information. Schedules, movements, staff rotations. I was not told about an extraction. I was not told anyone would get hurt." Her eyes moved to Roman, and the look she gave him was complicated and bitter and exhausted. "That was never supposed to be part of it." "What did they offer you?" Roman said. Silence. "Martha." His voice dropped a register. "What did they offer you?" "My son," she said. The room was still. "He owes them money," she said. "Has for 4 years. They told me the debt disappears if I pass them what they needed." She looked at Ivy, and the crack in her composure widened. "I didn't want it to be you. I want you to know that. I told them you were innocent. They told me everyone is innocent until they're useful." Ivy's hands had stopped shaking. That was somehow more alarming than when they'd been shaking. "Was any of it real?" she asked. Her voice sounded like it belonged to someone standing much further away. "The soup. The conversations. February. In the kitchen at 3 in the morning. Yes," Martha said. Immediately. With something that looked devastatingly like sincerity. "That's what I'm telling you. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm telling you that those were real. That doesn't change what I did. I need you to know they were real." Ivy looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked away. The kitchen door exploded inward. Not metaphorically. The door literally blew off its hinges. Another shape charge, smaller, designed for entry. And 3 figures came through it in the space of 2 seconds, moving in the low, tactical crouch of trained men, weapons up, clearing the corners in sequence. Ivy hit the floor without deciding to. 3 shots. 3 shots from behind her, and the sound in the enclosed kitchen was enormous and physical, like being shoved hard in both ears simultaneously, and by the time the ringing started, the 3 figures were on the floor, and Roman was crossing the kitchen with a kind of absolute, unhurried purpose that was more frightening than if he'd been running. He reached Martha. His hand went to her throat. Not crushing, not violent, but definite. inescapable. He turned her to face Ivy, and his voice when he spoke was controlled in the way that a thing is controlled when enormous force is being applied to keep it that way. "Look at her," he said. Martha looked. "Look at what you sold," he said. Martha's composure finished collapsing. It didn't happen dramatically. It happened the way structural failures happen, quietly and then all at once. Her face crumpled and her free hand came up and covered her mouth, and the sound she made was small and terrible. Roman held her there for 3 more seconds. Then he released her and stepped back and turned away from her like she'd stopped existing, and Ivy understood that this was not mercy and it was not cruelty. It was something more clinical than either. He had extracted what he needed from the moment and moved on. "Secure her," he said into the radio. "Kitchen, don't hurt her." He came back to Ivy. "Can you stand up?" She was already standing. He looked at her face for a moment to see, not the assessing look he usually gave things, something more careful and specific. Then he nodded once, and she understood the nod was acknowledgement of something she hadn't said out loud, and they moved. The study was on the ground floor's south side, one of the rooms she'd had regular access to, and Roman brought her there because the fighting had moved to the perimeter and the interior was, temporarily, quiet. He locked the door and engaged a secondary bolt she hadn't known about and set the handgun on the desk within reach and went to the far wall. There was a safe behind the hopper print she'd always assumed was decorative. He opened it. He removed a manila envelope and a small flat wooden box and set them both on the desk in front of her. The box first. Inside it, a necklace on a thin silver chain, a small disc pendant worn smooth at the edges. Ivy had seen it exactly once in her life, around her brother's neck in a photograph from before their mother died. She'd never known what happened to it. Her hand moved before she told it to. Her fingers closed around the chain. "He left it with me that night," Roman said. "I don't know if he knew what was coming or if it was coincidence. He took it off while we were waiting for the operation to start, and he held it for a while, and then he put it in my hand, and he didn't say anything about it." Ivy held the necklace in her closed fist and felt the disc press into her palm. The envelope. She looked at Roman. "He wrote it a week before he died," Roman said. "He gave it to me with instructions to give it to you when the contract on your name was neutralized. I've been carrying it for 2 years." "Why didn't you just—" "Because the contract wasn't neutralized." His voice was even. "Because if I'd found you and handed you a letter from your dead brother and then something happened to you before I could finish what he started, the letter would have been the last thing you had, and it would have been worthless because you'd be gone." A pause. "I needed you safe first. Then you could grieve." Ivy stared at him. "That," she said, "is the most controlling thing I've ever heard." "I know. You decided when I got to find out my brother was dead." "Yes." "You decided when I got to grieve." "Yes." "You don't get to do that." Her voice had an edge now, clean and sharp and coming from somewhere past the grief, from the part of her that had survived 12 years in the foster system and 3 restaurant jobs, and an existence that had never once offered her the luxury of someone else making decisions on her behalf. "You don't get to decide that for me. Whatever your reasons were, whatever Elias asked you to do, you don't get to just manage my life like it's a problem you're solving." Roman absorbed this. He didn't flinch, and he didn't argue, and he didn't explain further. "You're right," he said. The simplicity of it knocked the edge off her momentum. "That's all you have to say. What else would you like me to say?" "I'd like you to—" She stopped. Her hands pressed the envelope flat against the desk. "I'd like a lot of things that are not available right now." "Read the letter," he said. She opened the envelope. The paper inside was folded in thirds, handwritten in the particular cramped left-leaning script she'd grown up watching move across homework pages and birthday cards and the margins of paperback novels their mother used to keep on the bathroom shelf. She read it. She read it once quickly, the way you read something when you're bracing for impact. Then she read it again slowly, making herself stay with each sentence, making herself absorb the fact that this was Elias's voice on paper, his specific, private, irreplaceable voice, and that this was the last of it, the last new thing she would ever hear him say. He was funny in it. That was what broke her open again. He was funny and self-deprecating and then serious in the way he always got serious, suddenly and completely, like a switch. He told her things he'd never said out loud. He told her what she'd been worth to him. He told her what he'd been trying to do and why and how he'd miscalculated, and that he was sorry for that part but not for the rest of it. And at the very end, in handwriting that was slightly less steady than the rest, as if he'd written the last lines quickly or under some kind of pressure, "I found someone I trust to keep you. I know that sounds like I'm handing you off like property, and I hate that. But it's the best I could do, and I need you to understand it was the best anyone in my position could do. Don't judge him by the surface. Look at what he actually does. That's always been your gift, seeing what things actually are. Use it. Love her for me," I asked him. "I'm going to hold him to it." Ivy set the letter down. She couldn't look at Roman. She stared at the desk and she breathed and she made herself stay in her body because every instinct she had was telling her to put distance between herself and the information she'd just received, to find a wall or a corner and process it in isolation the way she'd processed every other difficult thing in her life. Alone, without witnesses, without the risk of being seen coming apart. But there was nowhere to go. The estate was a battlefield, and the man 3 feet away from her had spent 2 years keeping a deathbed promise to her dead brother. And she was wearing a dress with a tracker in it, and Martha Cole had been feeding her soup and selling her location simultaneously, and Elias had died in November, and she'd been celebrating a promotion. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. "He said you loved her," she said. It came out before she decided to say it. Silence behind her. "He said, in the recording, before the end, he said, 'Tell her I loved her,' and you stopped the recording before that part." She lowered her hands and looked at the wall. "You stopped it right before." Another silence. Longer. "Yes," Roman said. "Why?" "Because you were already on the floor." His voice was rough in a way she hadn't heard from it before. "And I didn't—" A stop. "I didn't want to be the person who used that to finish breaking you. You can hear the rest of it whenever you want. I'll give you the full file, but not on the floor of my war room 30 seconds after you found out." Ivy turned around. She looked at him. Really looked. The way Elias's letter had told her to look, past the surface of the thing, at what it actually was. Roman Verzetti, who had built a fake employment agency and bought out a trafficking contract and kept a dead man's letter for 2 years and stopped an audio recording when he thought she'd already taken enough damage for one moment. The man who, she was beginning to understand with a clarity that alarmed her, had oriented 2 years of his life around a promise made to someone dying in his arms. She didn't know what to do with that. She didn't know if she was allowed to do anything with it or if there was a version of the next 5 minutes in which any of it made sense. She took one step toward him, and the window behind Roman's head exploded inward. Not the glass. The entire reinforced frame, blown clean out of the wall by a blast from outside, and Roman was already moving before the debris fully cleared, dropping low and pivoting, and Ivy saw the red dot appear on the far wall where her head had been half a second before she registered what it was. A laser sight. She hit the floor and something tore through the air above her with a sound like fabric ripping at high velocity, and the wall to her left cracked and spat plaster, and she was crawling without deciding to crawl, moving toward the desk because it was the only solid thing in the room that wasn't currently being destroyed. Roman fired twice toward the blown-out window. Return fire from the roof answered. His counter-snipers, finally finding the angle. Then silence. Then the radio. Shooter down. East exterior. Second shooter still unconfirmed. Stay down. Ivy was behind the desk with her back against the heavy oak, and her knees against her chest, and the knife still in her hand, the blade extended because at some point in the last 20 seconds, she'd opened it without realizing. Her pulse was in her ears, in her throat, in her wrists. Every breath felt like it was coming from somewhere shallower than the last. Roman appeared at the side of the desk. He crouched down in front of her, putting himself at her level, and his face was cut across the left cheekbone. A piece of the blown window frame, she thought, a sharp edge at the wrong angle. And he was bleeding and apparently ignoring it the way he apparently ignored most things that inconvenienced him. He looked at her face. "Ivy, I'm fine." "You're not fine." "I'm functionally fine. I'm not shot. I'm not—" "Look at me." He waited until she did. His dark eyes were very close and very steady, and the bleeding cut on his face made him look more human than she'd ever seen him. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Okay." He held her gaze for one more second. Then, the sniper was positioned on the exterior east wall. That's not a defensive position. That's an execution position. They weren't trying to breach this room. She understood. They were trying to kill me, she said. They were trying to kill a witness. His voice was flat and deliberate. You're the last person alive who has a legal connection to the trafficking contract on your name. With you gone, the documentation trail Elias spent 16 months building goes cold. With you gone, the case your brother died for disappears. Ivy stared at him. They were never coming to take me, she said slowly. The restaurant, the reunion, it was never... They were going to let me walk out of this estate and then kill you in transit, Roman said. Clean, away from my security perimeter, away from anything that could be traced back to Volkov. He paused. The tracker in the dress was the contingency. When you didn't leave on schedule, they decided to come here instead. The knife in her hand suddenly felt very small. So this is my fault, she said. No. I put on the dress. I walked toward the door. I almost... No. His voice came down hard on the word, not loud, but definitive. You responded to something that was designed specifically to make you respond. They used your brother. They used the one thing in the world that could have made you stop thinking clearly. That's not stupidity, Ivy. That's just being human. A pause, and something in his voice shifted almost imperceptibly. I almost didn't get to the door in time. If you'd been 30 seconds faster... He stopped, closed his mouth. The sentence sat unfinished in the air between them. She understood what the end of it was. Outside, the radio crackled with updates she couldn't fully process. The perimeter was holding. The second sniper position was being swept. The surviving members of the breach team were in custody. Martha Cole was in one of the estate's secured rooms, sitting in a chair, not speaking, and Ivy Hale was crouched behind a mahogany desk in a room with a blown-out wall, holding a folding knife, wearing a red dress she would never wear again, with her brother's necklace pressed so hard into her palm that the chain had left a mark. She looked at Roman. She thought about the letter. Look at what he actually does. She reached up, her palm pressed flat against his chest, over the left side, over the place where the white shirt had a small dark stain she was only now noticing. Not from the cut on his face, from something earlier, absorbed during the fight in the corridor, a graze she'd missed in the dark. She could feel his heartbeat through her palm, fast but steady. The heartbeat of a man who was afraid and functioning anyway, which was, she was beginning to understand, the only kind of bravery that was actually real. He went very still. I'm not forgiving you, she said quietly. Not tonight. Maybe not for a while. I know. You should have told me. I know. But... She felt his heartbeat under her hand and thought about November and soup and a necklace worn smooth at the edges. But I understand why you didn't. He looked at her for a long moment. Then his hand came up and covered hers, not moving it, not redirecting it, just holding it there between his palm and his chest, and it was the most undefended gesture she'd ever seen from him, the kind that cost something. She leaned forward and kissed him. It lasted 4 seconds. And it was nothing like the kind of kiss that happens in cleaned-up versions of nights like this one. It tasted like adrenaline and dust, and the particular desperation of two people who have both come very close to not being alive and are still processing the fact that they are. It was graceless and necessary, and when she pulled back, he looked at her like she'd done something to him that he hadn't had a defense prepared for. Good. She pulled her hand back from his chest. The radio in Roman's jacket crackled. A voice she didn't recognize, low, steady, carrying the particular cadence of someone who is very far away and wants you to know they are not concerned about the distance. Mr. Vercetti, I understand the evening has been eventful. I hope Miss Hale is still available to speak. There are documents she hasn't seen yet, documents her brother never knew existed. I think once she reads them, she'll understand the situation more completely. A pause. The situation, specifically, is this. You cannot protect her forever. And the man you've had feeding you intelligence on my organization for the past 6 months is not who you think he is. The line went dead. Roman's face had gone somewhere past cold. Ivy looked at him. Who was that? She said. Roman didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was very quiet. That he said, is the man who gave the order to kill your brother. And for the first time since the night began, Ivy understood that they hadn't found the bottom yet. That whatever had been hunting her was larger and older and more patient than anything Roman had prepared for, and that the person he trusted most in this fight might already be standing on the wrong side of it. Roman moved first. He was across the study in 4 steps, pulling open the secondary communications panel behind the bookcase. Another thing Ivy hadn't known existed, another layer of the house that had been operating beneath the surface of the one she'd been living in. His hands worked the panel with precision, pulling feeds, cross-referencing signal data, and his face had the quality of a man doing arithmetic on a problem where all the numbers were wrong. Ivy stood up from behind the desk. Her legs were steadier than they had any right to be. "You said 6 months," she said. "The voice said you had someone feeding you intelligence on his organization for 6 months. Who?" Roman didn't answer. "Roman, I heard you." "Then answer me." He turned from the panel. His expression was doing something complicated and controlled, and she was getting better at reading the gaps in his control. The places where what he was actually feeling pushed against the surface of what he was permitting himself to show. Right now, the gap was significant. "His name is Declan Ferris," Roman said. "He came to me 7 months ago. Former logistics coordinator for the Volkov Midwest cell. He told me he wanted out, that he had documentation that could dismantle the entire operation, that he needed protection in exchange for intelligence." A pause. "He's been inside my network since then. Access to personnel schedules, safe house locations, communication protocols." Ivy absorbed this. "And tonight," she said slowly, "every single one of those things was used against you." Roman's jaw tightened. "The East Breach team knew the camera blind spots," he said. "The West team hit the service door during the 4-minute window between patrol rotations. The sniper was positioned at the one exterior angle not covered by my roof team." He turned back to the panel. "None of that is coincidence." Ferris told them. Ferris told them everything. Ivy watched the back of his head, the set of his shoulders, the way his hands had stilled on the panel. Not from calm, from the particular stillness of a man holding something in that wants very badly to come out. "Where is he now?" she said. "That's what I'm trying to determine." "He's in this house." Roman turned. "The voice on the radio," she said. "He said documents she hasn't seen yet. Not I'll send them or I'll arrange a meeting. He said she hasn't seen them yet. Present tense. Proximity." She held Roman's gaze. "He's still inside the estate." 3 seconds of silence. Roman picked up the radio. "All units. I need a location on Declan Ferris. Last known position, current status, everything you have." He released the button. Waited. The radio was quiet for 8 seconds, which was 7 seconds longer than it should have been. Then a voice. One of his security team, a man named Briggs, whose voice Ivy recognized from a year of overhearing radio check-ins. "Mr. Versetti." Ferris checked in at the East Security Post at the start of the breach. Said he was coordinating with the response team. We assumed, "Where is he now, Briggs?" "We don't have eyes on him, sir. He's not at the East Post. He's not on any of the interior feeds." Roman set the radio down with a deliberateness that was more alarming than if he'd thrown it. "Get away from the door," he said to Ivy. She moved, not because she fully understood why, but because his voice had dropped into a register she hadn't heard from it before. So, not the cold authority he used for operations, something below that, something that operated at the level of actual danger rather than the management of it. She moved to the interior wall, away from the blown-out window, away from the door, into the corner where 2 solid walls met and nothing could come at her from behind. Roman went to the door. He didn't open it. He stood beside it, not in front of it, back flat against the wall, and he listened. The estate had gone quiet in the way that large spaces go quiet after violence. Not peaceful, but emptied, like a room after everyone has left in a hurry. The gunfire had stopped. The radio traffic had thinned. The emergency lights were still running their slow red pulse across every surface. Ivy listened too. She heard the rain, still going, still relentless against the exterior. She heard the distant sound of her own pulse in her ears. She heard the house breathing, the ventilation system, the settling of the structure, the specific acoustic signature of the study that she'd learned over 12 months of moving through it. She heard something else, footsteps in the corridor outside. Slow, deliberate. Not the rapid tactical movement of a man running towards something, but the measured pace of someone who already knows the layout and isn't in a hurry because they believe they have the advantage. Roman heard it too. She could tell by the way his weight shifted. The footsteps stopped outside the study door. A knock. 2 knocks, actually. Precise and almost polite, which was somehow the most unsettling sound she'd heard all night. Roman. A man's voice. Mid-range, Midwestern accent, mostly scrubbed away, but not entirely. The kind of voice that had been trained to sound unremarkable. I know she's in there with you. I'm not here to hurt anyone tonight. I just want to talk. Roman said nothing. The breach team was never supposed to reach the interior, the voice continued. That was Soren exceeding his mandate. I want you to know that. I had a specific arrangement in mind and he complicated it. A pause. I'm unarmed. You can verify that however you want. Ivy looked at Roman. Roman looked at the door. Open it, she said quietly. His eyes cut to her. He's been in your network for 7 months, she said, keeping her voice just above a breath. He already knows everything there is to know about this house. He's not going to learn anything new by coming through that door, but we might. Roman held her gaze. Then he moved to the door and opened it. Declan Ferris was 41 years old and looked like someone had designed him specifically to be forgettable. Medium height, medium build, brown hair going gray at the temples, a face that arranged itself naturally into an expression of mild reasonableness. He was dressed in the same dark operational clothing Roman's security team wore, which explained how he'd moved through the estate without flagging any camera. His hands were visible and empty, held slightly away from his body in the universal gesture of I am demonstrating that I am not a threat, which was, Ivy thought, exactly the kind of gesture a man made when he needed you to stop paying attention to the ways he actually was one. He looked at Ivy first, not at Roman, at her. Miss Hale, he said, I'm sorry about your brother. Don't, she said. I know how that sounds. I said don't. His eyes moved to Roman. I'm going to come inside if that's all right. It's not, Roman said. Roman. Ferris's voice was patient in a way that made Ivy's skin crawl. The patience of a man who has prepared extensively for a conversation and is confident in his preparation. I have information that changes the situation you think you're in. I'd like to share it. You can point a gun at me the entire time if it makes you feel better. I won't take it personally. Silence. Roman stepped aside. Ferris came into the study and stopped in the center of the room, equidistant from both of them, and Ivy noticed that he'd positioned himself with a clear sightline to both exits, the door he'd come through and the blown-out window frame, and that the mild, reasonable expression on his face hadn't shifted by a single degree, which meant it wasn't a reaction to anything in the room. It was a default setting, a mask worn so long it had fused with the face beneath it. She'd met people like that before, in the foster system, in the particular ecosystem of adults who worked with children they didn't plan to protect. She knew what sustained deception looked like when it had calcified into personality. Roman closed the door. He kept the gun in his hand, aimed low, but present. Talk, he said. Ferris reached into his jacket, slowly, demonstratively, and produced a flat drive. He set it on the desk between them. Everything on that drive is real, he said. Chain of custody documentation, financial records, communication logs. I spent 18 months compiling it before I came to you. He looked at Roman steadily. I also spent those 18 months working for Alexei Volkov. That part is also true. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. You fed me compromised intelligence, Roman said. I fed you accurate intelligence that was useful to my employer when it served his interests and withheld intelligence that wasn't. Yes. Ferris's voice didn't waver. That's what I was doing. I'm telling you now because the situation has changed. What situation? Ferris looked at Ivy. The drive contains documentation of a contract, he said. Not the trafficking contract on your name, so you already know about that. A second contract, older, one that predates you by 15 years. He paused. It's a contract on your mother. The room went very quiet. My mother has been dead for 16 years, Ivy said. Yes, Ferris said. She has. The silence stretched. What are you saying? Roman said. His voice had gone flat in the particular way it went flat when he already understood something and was waiting for the confirmation to make it real. Mara Hale didn't die in a car accident, Ferris said. She died because she was the primary witness in a federal investigation into the original Volkov operation, not the current Midwest Cell, the Eastern Seaboard organization from the 90s that the current leadership evolved from. She had documentation. She had names. She had testified in a preliminary proceeding that, if it had reached trial, would have dismantled the entire financial structure that the current operation is built on. He looked at Ivy. She was removed. Her children were separated through the foster system to prevent either of them from inheriting whatever she might have passed on to them. And a tracking contract was put in place on both of them to monitor their locations indefinitely. Ivy's back was against the wall. She'd moved there without knowing it. Elias knew, she said. It wasn't a question. The pieces were moving into alignment with the specific horrible momentum of things that were always true and are only now being seen. Elias found out approximately 2 years before he died, Ferris said. It was what motivated him to approach Roman's organization. He wasn't just trying to neutralize the contract on your name. He was trying to reach the original documentation your mother had compiled, copies she'd made before she was killed, hidden through intermediaries, that the Volkov organization has been trying to locate for 15 years. Did he find it? Roman said. Ferris hesitated. 1 second, 2. That hesitation was the most honest thing he'd done since he walked in the door, and it told Ivy everything before the words did. He found a location, Ferris said. A dead drop address in Milwaukee. A storage unit registered under a name your mother used before she remarried. He passed the address to Roman's network 6 days before the ambush. He paused. It was in the operational briefing for the Calumet City operation. Ivy looked at Roman. Something was happening to Roman's face. The operational briefing, she said carefully, that was compromised. The operational briefing, Ferris said, that I wrote. The room temperature seemed to drop. You wrote the briefing, Roman said. His voice was very, very quiet. I was coordinating logistics for that operation on your behalf, Ferris said. That was 8 months before I came to you. I was already embedded in your network through a different channel. A man named Pierce, who your organization trusted and who was passing my employer information about your operations for 2 years before you identified him as a problem. A pause. You removed Pierce in March of that year. By then, I was already in place through 3 other contact points. You didn't know. Roman stood completely still. The Calumet City ambush, he said, was coordinated using intelligence from the briefing I wrote, Ferris said. Yes. Ivy watched Roman absorb this. She watched him absorb the specific information that the ambush that had killed Elias Hale, the ambush that had sent a 19-year-old kid with a photography scholarship and a nickname for his sister into a Calumet City alley to die, had been built on intelligence provided by the man standing 3 feet away from him in his own study. She watched Roman understand that he'd been carrying Ferris inside his network for 7 months, trusting him, using him, building operations around his intelligence. Roman's gun hand moved, not all the way. An incremental shift, the weapon rising from a low carry to something closer to a direct aim, a purely involuntary adjustment, the body moving ahead of the decision. His breathing had changed. She could see it in the shift of his chest and shoulders, the rhythm going slightly wrong. Roman, she said. He didn't look at her. Roman. Louder. His eyes stayed on Ferris. If you do that, she said, we lose everything on that drive. 3 seconds. His gun hand lowered. Ferris had not moved, had not flinched, had stood in the center of the room and absorbed the full weight of Roman's recalibration with the stillness of a man who had calculated this moment and decided he could survive it. Whether that was courage or sociopathy, Ivy couldn't determine. Possibly both. Possibly there wasn't a meaningful difference. Why? Roman said. His voice was barely audible. Why are you telling us this now? Because Alexei Volkov is dying, Ferris said. Stage 4. He has 3 months, possibly less. His son Mikhail is taking operational control, and Mikhail does not share his father's preferences regarding subtlety. He looked between them. Alexei wanted the documentation your mother compiled, found, and destroyed quietly. Mikhail wants everyone connected to it eliminated, and he wants it done publicly. And he has told me directly that once he assumes full control, he will begin with the 2 of you and work outward from there. So you're switching sides, Ivy said. I'm making a practical decision about my survival. That's the same thing dressed up. Ferris looked at her with something that might, in another context, have been respect. Yes, he said. It is. The storage unit in Milwaukee, Roman said. Is it still active? I don't know. I passed the location to Volkov's team at the time of the ambush. Whether they accessed it and found the documentation, or whether the unit expired and the contents were disposed of, I genuinely don't know. What I do know is that if the documentation still exists, it is the single most valuable piece of evidence in the country regarding the financial architecture of the current operation. And if Mikhail Volkov believes there's any chance it still exists, he'll move to destroy it before he takes over, Roman said. He'll move to destroy everything associated with it, Ferris said. The unit. Anyone who knows the unit exists. His eyes moved to Ivy. Anyone whose mother put the original documentation together. Ivy looked at the drive on the desk. She looked at Ferris. She looked at Roman, who was still standing with the gun in his hand and a cut on his face and a stain on his shirt from a wound he hadn't mentioned, and whose expression had traveled somewhere she didn't have a map for, past anger, past the cold operational calm, into something rawer and more fundamental that she thought might be grief. Not for Elias specifically, for the version of events he'd been living in for 2 years, the version where the ambush was an intelligence failure and not a deliberate construction. The version where his culpability was limited to not protecting Elias well enough, rather than actively building the network that had gotten him killed. You need to decide something, Ferris said to Roman. The drive gives you enough to move against the current operation if you have federal cooperation. I can arrange the introduction. I have a contact in the organized crime division who is not compromised, who has been building toward this case for 4 years and needs the financial documentation to close it. But it has to happen before Mikhail assumes control, which means it has to happen in the next 72 hours. He paused. And the storage unit needs to be reached before his advance team gets there, which, based on the communication I intercepted before I came to find you, means you have approximately 14 hours. Boss, cheat. Roman said nothing. I know what I'm asking, Ferris said. I know what I am to you right now. I'm asking you to use me anyway because I'm the only asset you have with the access you need in the time you have. A pause. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a transaction. The silence lasted a long time. Roman looked at Ivy. She understood what the look was asking. He was asking whether she could be in the same room as this man long enough to use what he was offering. He was asking whether the things she'd just learned, about her mother, about the ambush, about the specific chain of decisions that had orphaned her and separated her from her brother and put both their names on contracts, whether that was going to make her a liability or an asset in the next 72 hours. She was asking herself the same question. The answer frightened her, because the honest answer was that something had changed in the last 30 seconds. Not cracked or bent. Changed. Reconfigured. The grief was still there. The rage was still there. But they'd been moved to a different part of her interior, filed under later, and what had moved to the front was something colder and more deliberate and completely new. She wanted the documentation, not because it would fix anything, not because it would bring her mother back or give Elias his years or undo the foster system or the contracts or the November night in Calumet City. She wanted it because it was the thing her mother had died to protect and her brother had died trying to reach. And if there was a storage unit in Milwaukee with a dead woman's evidence in it, she was going to be the one who opened it. Tell us about the federal contact, she said. Both men looked at her. You said your contact in the organized crime division has been building toward this case for 4 years. She held Ferris's gaze. I want a name. I want a case number. I want enough information to verify independently that this person exists and is what you say they are before anyone in this room trusts anything else you tell us. She paused. And then I want everything you know about that storage unit. Ferris studied her for a moment. You're not what I expected, he said. Name, she said. Case number. Storage unit. In that order. He gave her the name. Roman was already moving to the communications panel, cross-referencing, and Ivy kept her eyes on Ferris while he worked because she'd learned something tonight about what happened when you stopped watching the things in the room that wanted you to stop watching them. The verification took 9 minutes. The federal contact was real. The case was real. The 4-year timeline was real. Roman said nothing when he confirmed it. Just a slight adjustment of his posture, a recalibration, the way a man moves when the ground shifts under him and he decides to keep walking anyway. The storage unit, Roman said. Ferris gave them the address. Roman wrote it down and then locked the paper in the safe, and then looked at Ferris with the particular expression of a man who has decided to use a tool he doesn't trust because it's the only tool available, and who wants the tool to understand exactly what the arrangement is. You stay in this house, he said. You don't use any communications device that isn't provided by my team. You don't move through any part of this estate without an escort. You don't speak to anyone outside this room until I authorize it. Understood. If I find out you've contacted Volkov's organization after this conversation, I won't waste time being angry about it. Understood, Ferris said again. His voice hadn't changed. The mild, reasonable expression hadn't shifted. Roman turned to Ivy. We leave for Milwaukee in 2 hours, he said. I need to make arrangements. I need to... Roman. He looked at her. She crossed the room to him, stopped close enough that she could see the cut on his cheekbone had stopped bleeding, but the wound on his side, plus the one he'd been ignoring, the stain on the shirt, had not. She reached up and pressed 2 fingers against his ribs, gently, and felt him control the response to the pressure. That needs to be looked at before we go anywhere, she said. It's not. It needs to be looked at. She held his gaze. Elias's letter said to look at what you actually do. What you're actually doing right now is ignoring a wound because you've decided it's not operationally relevant, and that is the most predictable thing you've done all night. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, something near it. There's a medical kit in the panic room, he said. I know, she said. I saw it when we passed through. I know where everything in this house is, remember. I was the house manager. She went to get it. She moved through the corridor quickly, past the study door, past the damage in the walls where the firefight had happened, past everything that the last 3 hours had left behind in the physical fabric of the house. She didn't let herself slow down for any of it. Later. All of it. Later. She found the panic room, retrieved the kit, and turned to go back. Her phone, her personal phone, which she'd had in the red purse, which was still somehow in her hand, which she'd been carrying through the entire night without fully registering it, vibrated. She looked at it automatically. A text message. Unknown number. The storage unit has a secondary lock. The code is your mother's birthday. He didn't know that part. Nobody told him. Your brother figured it out 3 weeks before he died, and he told one person. Ivy stared at the screen. He told Roman. Her breath left her. She read it again. Then a second message appeared below it. Ask him why he never went to get it. The phone went dark. Ivy stood in the red-lit corridor with the medical kit in her hands and the phone on her palm, and the specific, terrible quality of a question she didn't want to ask settling into her chest like a stone into water. Roman had known the code. Roman had known the code for 2 years. And the documentation that could have closed the case her brother died for, that could have dismantled the organization that had killed her mother and sold her name and hunted her across her entire adult life. That documentation had been sitting in a storage unit in Milwaukee for 730 days. Untouched. She walked back to the study. Roman was at the communications panel, his back to her, coordinating the arrangements for Milwaukee with the precise economy of a man who had made decisions like this many times before. She set the medical kit on the desk. She waited until he turned. Tell me something, she said. Her voice was very quiet. He looked at her. The storage unit. She watched his face, watched for the thing she was afraid she would see. The secondary lock. Do you know the code? The pause was brief. Brief enough that another person might have missed it. She didn't miss it. Roman's face did something she had never seen it do. Something that wasn't cold and wasn't calculating and wasn't any of the controlled surfaces he presented to the world. It cracked open, just slightly, at the foundation, the way a wall cracks when the structure behind it shifts. Yes, he said. The word landed between them. How long? She said. He held her gaze. Elias told me 3 weeks before Calumet City, he said. 730 days. Ivy felt the room tilt. You knew where it was, she said. You knew the code. You spent 2 years building a fake employment agency and buying out contracts and keeping me inside these walls, and you never went to get it. No. Why? The word came out stripped of everything except the question. No anger yet, just the bare fact of needing to understand. Why didn't you go? Roman looked at her for a long moment. Because going meant closing the case, he said. And closing the case meant you were safe, and if you were safe... He stopped. Something moved across his face that she didn't have a name for. If you were safe, there was no reason for you to stay. The silence was absolute. Ivy understood. The full shape of it. The man who had spent 2 years protecting her, who had built an entire structure of safety around her and called it a promise to her brother. That man had also, somewhere in the accumulated weight of 730 days, made a choice. Not a cruel choice. Not a calculated one. The choice of a person who had found something he didn't know he was missing and had not been able to make himself let it go. He had kept her safe. He had also kept her. And the difference between those two things was the most important question she'd ever been asked to answer. When this is over, she said slowly, when we get to Milwaukee and we open that unit and we give everything to your federal contact and the case closes, what happens to me? Roman looked at the floor. I had a plan, he said. New identity, money, documents, complete freedom. His jaw tightened. I was going to let you go. And now... He lifted his eyes. And now I don't know, he said. If I can. Ivy looked at him. Really looked. The way Elias had asked her to look, past the surface, at what the thing actually was. And what she saw was not a captor, and not a protector, and not the crime king who had occupied the nightmare position in her imagination for 12 months. She saw a man who had made a terrible choice out of the worst possible reason, and she saw that he knew it. We're going to Milwaukee, she said. We're going to open that unit, and whatever is in it, we're going to finish what my mother started and what my brother died for. She held his gaze. And after that, you do not get to decide what happens to me. Not anymore. Not ever again. Roman nodded. Understood, he said. The single word carried the weight of a man surrendering something he'd been holding for 2 years, and the surrender was not clean or painless, and he made no attempt to pretend it was. Outside, the rain had finally begun to thin. Somewhere to the north, in a storage unit in Milwaukee, registered under a dead woman's name, the documentation that had cost 2 lives and 1 childhood sat in the dark and waited for someone to finally come and claim it. And in the corridor outside the study, Declan Ferris stood with his mild, reasonable face and his empty hands and his phone pressed silent against his thigh, a phone that had sent 2 text messages in the last 4 minutes from a number that did not belong to him, and smiled. Roman found Ferris in the corridor 20 seconds later, not by accident, by the specific quality of stillness a man has when he's been standing somewhere. He shouldn't have been standing long enough to hear something he wasn't meant to hear. Roman had spent enough years reading rooms and bodies and the negative space around people to know the difference between someone walking past a door and someone positioned beside it. He said nothing. He looked at Ferris for 3 seconds. Ferris looked back with the mild, reasonable expression intact and said nothing either, and the silence between them was the kind that contained an entire conversation neither man was going to have out loud. Then Roman moved past him toward the communications panel to finish the Milwaukee arrangements, and Ferris fell into step behind him like a man who had decided that forward was the only direction available. Ivy watched from the doorway. She had heard what she'd heard. She had seen what she'd seen. And she had made a decision in the corridor that she hadn't fully articulated even to herself yet. A decision that had something to do with the text messages and something to do with Ferris's position outside the study door and something to do with the specific kind of patience she'd developed over a childhood of learning that the most dangerous people in a room were rarely the loudest ones. She would watch him. That was all. For now, she would watch him. The next 2 hours moved with the compressed urgency of preparation. Roman's remaining security team, 4 men, down from 6, and nobody discussed the arithmetic of that, swept the estate and secured the perimeter and dealt with the aftermath of the breach in the efficient, joyless way of professionals who had done this before and would do it again. Ivy changed out of the red dress in the room she'd occupied for 12 months, pulling on dark clothes and boots with the particular deliberateness of someone shedding one version of themselves. She left the dress on the floor. She didn't look back at it. She kept the necklace. It was around her throat when she came downstairs, the worn disc pendant sitting against her collarbone, and Roman noticed it and said nothing, and she was grateful for that specific silence. They took 2 vehicles, Roman, Ivy, and Ferris in the first, a black SUV with reinforced panels and tinted glass that Roman drove himself, which told her something about how much he trusted anyone else with the cargo. 2 of his security team in the second vehicle, following at a distance that was close enough for response and far enough for deniability. Ferris sat in the back. Ivy sat in the front passenger seat with Roman's secondary handgun in the pocket of her jacket. He'd given it to her without discussion, checked the safety, handed it over, and she'd taken it the same way. No ceremony, no conversation about whether she knew how to use it. She knew how to use it. That was another thing the foster system had given her, courtesy of a particular 2-year placement in her early teens that she never talked about, and that Roman, she realized, probably had detailed records of. The thought made something tighten in her chest that she filed under later alongside everything else. The drive to Milwaukee was 90 minutes in the rain. Nobody spoke for the first 40. Then Ferris said from the back seat, "The secondary lock is a 4-digit code. I told Roman your mother's birthday was the key. What I didn't tell him is that Mikhail's advance team will be there." Roman's eyes went to the rearview mirror. "You said 14 hours," Roman said. "I said approximately 14 hours based on the communication I intercepted before I came to find you. That was 3 hours ago. Something I've been considering in the interim is that the communication I intercepted may have been intended for me to intercept." A pause. "Mikhail is not his father. He doesn't prefer subtlety, but he does prefer being underestimated." The SUV was very quiet. "You're saying the timeline was bait," Ivy said. "I'm saying it's possible." "How many?" Roman said. "Unknown. Mikhail doesn't operate with large teams. He operates with precise ones. 2 men, possibly 3. But they will be the specific 2 or 3 men he trusts with work that needs to be done correctly." A pause. "They will be better than what came to the estate tonight." Ivy looked at the dark highway unwinding in the headlights. "Why are you telling us this now?" she said. "You had 40 minutes of silence to choose from." "Because I spent 40 minutes deciding if telling you changed my position or improved it," Ferris said. "I decided it improved it." "That's the most honest thing you've said all night." "I'm aware." Roman said nothing. His hands were steady on the wheel, and his eyes were on the road, and the cut on his cheekbone had been cleaned and closed with butterfly strips that Ivy had applied in the study before they left. She'd worked carefully, and he'd held still, with the patience of a man accustomed to being repaired in a hurry. But the wound in his side was bandaged under his shirt, and she knew it was deeper than he'd admitted, because she'd seen his face when she'd pressed gauze against it, and his face had done the thing it did when he was controlling a response that he hadn't given himself permission to have. He was running on adrenaline and stubbornness. She was running on something she didn't have a clean name for yet. They reached the outskirts of Milwaukee at 4 in the morning. The city at this hour was all orange sodium light and empty intersections and the particular desolation of industrial districts that don't sleep but don't exactly stay awake either. The storage facility was in a neighborhood that had been something functional 30 years ago and was now a collection of corrugated metal buildings and chain-link fences and the skeletal remains of light industry that had relocated somewhere cheaper. Roman killed the headlights 2 blocks out. He pulled to the curb and stopped and looked at the facility's entrance 200 yards ahead. A gate in chain link, a small office building, a grid of storage units behind it. No visible lights in the office. One exterior lamp over the gate casting a circle of orange on wet asphalt. "How many entry points?" he said to Ferris. "Main gate, a service entrance on the south side, and an emergency exit on the north perimeter wall. The storage unit is in the 3rd row from the back, east side." "Unit 47. Roman picked up the radio, spoke briefly to the follow car, put it down. "We go in through the south service entrance," he said. "You—" He looked at Ivy. "Stay with me. 2 steps behind, same as the estate." His eyes held hers. "If I say run, the car is the destination. Keys are in it." "I know." "Ivy, I know," she said. "I'll run if I need to." "I won't need to." He looked at her for 1 second longer than necessary. Then he got out of the car. The rain had thinned to a mist that sat at shoulder height, and turned every light source into a halo and made the world feel like it had been reduced to a radius of 20 feet. Ivy moved through it behind Roman, close, her boots quiet on the wet asphalt, her right hand in her jacket pocket. Ferris was behind her. One of the security team was flanking wide on the left. The other was covering the main gate from a distance. The south service entrance was a personnel door in the chain link, padlocked. Roman's man had it open in 45 seconds with a tool Ivy didn't look at too carefully. They moved inside. The storage units were arranged in long parallel rows under corrugated roofing, open-sided. The units themselves sealed metal doors with individual locks. The facility was quiet except for the mist and the distant sound of the highway and the specific ambient hum of a place that stores things people don't know what to do with. Third row from the back, east side. They moved through the second row and Roman was in front, and Ivy was counting units automatically, the way she counted things when she was nervous, the way her brain had always reached for numbers when emotions got too large. She heard it before she saw it. A breath. Controlled, deliberate. The breath of someone who has been waiting and is very good at it. She grabbed Roman's arm. He stopped instantly. One beat of absolute stillness. Then the light hit them. Not a flashlight, a tactical lamp, the kind attached to a weapon, and it came from the far end of the row and lit the three of them in flat white. And behind it was a shape. And behind that shape was another shape. And Ivy's eyes adjusted fast enough to see that both shapes had weapons raised and were not moving and were waiting with the patience of men who had been there for some time and were not surprised by the arrival. Mr. Vercetti. The voice was accented, Eastern European, the consonants clipped at the edges. We've been expecting you for about an hour. I'm glad you made it. Roman didn't move. Kozlov, he said, you know me. Good. That saves introductions. The man stepped forward slightly into the edge of the lamp's spill, and Ivy could see him now. Mid-40s, heavily built, with the kind of face that had been broken and reset enough times that it had stopped arranging itself around expression and simply existed as architecture. He had a weapon on Roman, and his partner had a weapon on the space between Ivy and Ferris, and the geometry of it was deliberate and complete. Mikhail sends his regards. Where's the second team? Roman said. Watching your car, Kozlov said. Your two men in the follow vehicle are currently having a conversation with three of ours. I imagine it's not going well for them. He tilted his head. You came with less than I expected. I travel light. Tonight that's a problem for you. Ivy's hand was around the gun in her jacket pocket. Safety off. She'd done it in the car, quietly, without drawing attention to it. The weapon was a compact 9mm, and at this distance it would do what it was designed to do, and she had shot things before, tin cans and paper targets in a field behind a house she'd lived in for 8 months at 14, under the instruction of a man she hadn't liked but whose teaching had been competent. She calculated the angle. Then Ferris moved, not toward the threat. Sideways, a single lateral step that put distance between himself and Ivy, that repositioned him from behind her to beside her, that changed the geometry of the tableau in a way that was small and precise and completely intentional. Roman felt it. She felt Roman feel it, a tension that moved through his arm where her hand was still gripping it, a sudden recalibration, and she saw his eyes move fractionally to Ferris's new position, and she saw the understanding hit him. Ferris, Roman said, very quiet. I'm sorry, Ferris said. He didn't sound sorry. He sounded like a man completing a transaction. Kozlov smiled. The expression didn't reach anything above his jaw. Mr. Ferris has been very helpful, Kozlov said. Your second vehicle's location, your entry point, your timeline, all very helpful. He looked at Roman. The drive he gave you is real, by the way. I want you to know that. The federal contact is real. The case documentation is real. Mr. Ferris is a very thorough man. He builds things that work so that people trust them. A pause. The storage unit, however, does not contain what he told you it contains. Your mother's documentation, he looked at Ivy now, was recovered in January of the year following her death. It has been destroyed for 15 years. Ivy heard this. She processed it. She filed it. Then why are you here? She said. Kozlov looked at her with what might have been mild surprise. The surprise of a man who expected the woman in the room to be an accessory to the situation rather than a participant in it. Because you are here, he said simply. The documentation was always secondary. You were always the primary. While it existed, there was a reason to keep you alive. A witness who might one day reach it, testify to its authenticity, provide continuity of custody. Without it, you're simply a liability that has been outstanding for 16 years. He tilted his head again. Mikhail likes to close things. So Ferris brought us here, Roman said, to a location with no documentation and no leverage with our security split. To simplify the situation, yes. How much? Roman said to Ferris. Not angry, past angry. The voice of a man on the other side of emotion, operating in a place that was very clear and very cold. Ferris looked at him. Enough, Ferris said. Enough, Roman repeated. I told you, I make practical decisions. You told me that an hour ago. An hour ago I thought I understood what it meant. Roman's voice was very low and very even, and Ivy could feel the quality of it the way you feel pressure changes before weather. Now I understand it means you walked into my house and you sat across from this woman and you told her that her mother was murdered and watched her absorb that information, and then you led her to a room with a weapon in it and called it a transaction. Ferris said nothing. Look at her, Roman said. Ferris looked at Ivy. Roman moved. He moved the way he'd moved in the kitchen. Not fast, not dramatic, but with the absolute directional certainty of a man who has decided and is implementing. And the decision had been made somewhere in the 3 words, look at her, and everything that followed was just the physical expression of it. His weapon came up, and he put 1 shot into the tactical lamp at the end of the row, and the white light exploded, and the row went dark. Ivy dropped. She dropped because every instinct she had fired simultaneously, and the floor was better than standing, and she went sideways behind a concrete pillar, and the weapon was out of her pocket, and the return fire from Kozlov's partner came in 2 rapid shots that hit the unit door behind where she'd been standing, and the metal screamed. Footsteps. Roman moving in the dark. Moving. A collision. Bodies. Close. The sound of a weapon being fought over, and then a shot that went into the roof, and then nothing. Then 1 more shot. Then silence for 2 seconds. Ivy. Roman's voice. Close. Here. She was pressed against the pillar, gun up, unable to see anything in the dark that was useful. Are you? Fine. Stay there. More movement, farther away. Someone running. The sound of boots on wet concrete. The service entrance chain link rattling. Ferris or Kozlov or both. She couldn't determine direction in the dark. Then a sound she didn't expect. Her phone. Vibrating in her pocket. She almost ignored it. Then something. The same instinct that had told her to grab Roman's arm 30 seconds ago made her pull it out and look at the screen. Unknown number. Same unknown number. A text. Unit 47. The lock. Use the code. Right now. Whatever you hear, don't stop moving. She stared at it. Roman, she said. I said stay. Roman. Her voice cut through. Unit 47. Now. A pause in the dark. Ivy? I don't have time to explain. Move. She heard him decide. The quality of his silence changed. And then he was moving and she moved with him, staying close, one hand finding his arm in the dark the way she'd found the wall earlier, using him as a fix point. And they moved through the 3rd row east side, counting unit numbers by the small reflective decals on each door. 43. 44. Somewhere behind them Kozlov was in the dark too. She could hear his breathing, slower now, deliberate, the breathing of a man who has been trained to move silently in low light and is doing so. His partner was either down or flanking. She didn't know which. 45. 46. 47. She pulled out the phone and used its screen as a light, reckless, visible, a beacon for anyone in the row behind them, but there was no time to be careful about it. Padlock. Standard combination lock with a 4-digit override keypad on the face. Her mother's birthday. She entered it. The lock released. Roman was behind her, turned outward, covering the row they'd come through, and she pulled the door and it rolled upward on its track, with a sound like thunder in the enclosed space, and the phone screen threw just enough light to see it wasn't empty. It was not the archive she'd imagined. not filing boxes and documentation and the organized records of a woman building a case. It was smaller than that and more personal, and somehow, because of that, more devastating. A single waterproof case, the hard-sided kind, locked with the same kind of numeric keypad. Beside it, taped to the interior wall, a photograph. A woman she recognized from 2 other photographs she owned, the only 2 she'd ever had. Dark hair, serious eyes. A face she'd been trying to reconstruct from memory for 16 years and had never quite managed to hold still. Her mother. In the photograph, Mara Hale was standing in front of this unit. She was looking directly at the camera with an expression that contained no uncertainty whatsoever. The expression of a woman who has made her decision and is at peace with it. On the photograph, in handwriting that was not her mother's, she left this for you, not for the case, for you. She always knew it would be you. Ivy's hand was shaking. She didn't know when that had started. Roman said, from behind her, very quiet and very urgent. Ivy, someone's at the end of the row. She grabbed the case. It was heavier than it looked. She came out of the unit and Roman was right there, and she could see the shape at the end of the row now. One shape, moving with purpose, closing the distance between them. And Roman raised his weapon and the shape raised something back and the distance was 30 feet in closing. Kozlov, Roman said, 20 feet. Put it down, Roman said. 15. Kozlov's weapon was aimed at Ivy. Not at Roman. At Ivy. Specifically, precisely, with the practiced aim of a man who knows which target ends the problem. 10 feet. Give me the case, Kozlov said, and you walk out. Ivy looked at him. Then she looked at Roman. Roman's weapon was on Kozlov. Kozlov's weapon was on her. The geometry was what it was. 3 people, 2 weapons, 1 case. The math was simple and brutal, and everyone in the row understood it. Roman, she said. Don't, he said. Not to Kozlov, to her. He'd read what she was thinking. She could tell by the way his voice dropped, by the single word that came out with an urgency that had nothing operational in it. If he shoots you, she said, the case doesn't matter. If he gets the case, Roman said, none of this mattered. Let me worry about that. Ivy, she set the case on the ground. She stepped away from it. Roman made a sound that she'd never heard from him before. Sharp and involuntary. The sound of a man being hit with something that bypassed every defense he'd built. And Kozlov's eyes dropped to the case for exactly 1 second. 1 second was what Roman had been waiting for. He closed the distance in 2 steps and had Kozlov's weapon hand before the man could redirect. And the shot that fired went into the unit wall 6 inches to Ivy's left. And she felt the air move past her face, and she did not close her eyes, and she did not flinch, and she thought, with the particular clarity that extreme proximity to death sometimes produces, that Elias would have found that funny. The fight was short and ugly and loud. Kozlov was larger than Roman and had the specific brutality of a man for whom violence was a profession rather than a contingency, and the first 20 seconds were not clean. Something hit a unit door hard enough to dent it. Roman went down on one knee and came back up, and Kozlov had the reach advantage and used it twice before Roman got inside it, and then it shifted, and then it was over, and Kozlov was on the ground and not moving, and Roman was standing over him, breathing in the broken way of a man whose side injury has been significantly aggravated in the last 30 seconds. Ivy picked up the case. She went to Roman. He was bent forward slightly with one hand on his knee, catching his breath. And she put her free hand on his back and felt him breathing and counted the breaths until they steadied and said nothing because there was nothing to say. His security man appeared at the end of the row. South team is down, the man said. Ferris got through the service entrance. He's in the wind. Follow car. A pause. Marcus is hurt, but he'll hold. Devon's okay. Roman straightened. His face was doing the thing it did. The controlled surface reassembling itself over whatever was happening underneath. But it took longer than usual, and the surface was less complete when it got there. Secure this site, he said. Get Marcus to the car. He looked at Ivy. And call. His phone went off. He looked at the screen. Something happened to his face. Who is it? She said. He showed her the screen. The number on it was the same unknown number that had texted her twice tonight. The same number that had told her about the secondary lock. The same number that had told her to go to Unit 47 right now. The same number that had told her, in a corridor at the Blackthorn estate, to ask Roman why he'd never come to get the documentation. The call was connecting. Roman put it on speaker. A voice came through the phone, a voice that Ivy had heard 4 minutes and 12 seconds of in a recording in a war room, destroyed and barely audible, forcing out a childhood nickname before a gunshot ended it. A voice she had believed with total certainty was dead. "Roman," Elias Hale said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully, and I need you to not say anything until I'm finished." Ivy's legs stopped working. She was on the ground before she knew she was falling, and the case was in her lap, and both her hands were on the phone, and Roman was beside her on the concrete, and his hand was on her arm, and the storage facility was silent, and the mist was still falling, and the phone was between them and her brother. Her brother was speaking. "I know what you heard on that recording," Elias said. "I know what it sounded like. I need you to understand that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for all of it, for the recording, for the last 2 years, for what I asked Roman to carry while I couldn't be there." A pause, and in the pause she heard him breathing, and it was him. It was the specific rhythm of his breathing that she'd known since childhood, slower on the exhale, a habit he'd had since he was 9 years old and had never broken. "Ivy, I need you to know that the choice I made was the worst thing I've ever done, and the only thing I've ever done that I'm certain was right." The concrete was cold under her. The mist was on her face. Her brother's voice was coming through a phone in a Milwaukee storage facility at 4 in the morning, and the case was in her lap, and Roman's hand was on her arm, and she was not crying because she had run completely out of the capacity for tears. Somewhere around the 3rd time tonight that the floor had come up to meet her. "Tell me where you are," she said. Her voice was very steady. She was going to be very angry later. Right now, she was going to be very steady. "That's what I'm trying to tell you," Elias said. "I'm going to explain everything, but you need to be somewhere safe first, and there's something else you need to know before morning." A pause. "The case you have, open it before you go anywhere. There's a key taped to the inside lid. It belongs to a safe deposit box in Chicago that contains the original documentation. Not copies. Originals." Another pause. "Mom hid the case in that unit 2 weeks before she died. She left it for you specifically because she always said you were the one who'd know what to do with it." Ivy looked at the case in her lap. Roman looked at her. Outside, at the end of the storage row, the orange light from the facility lamp cut through the mist and reached almost far enough to touch them. Almost. "Elias," she said. "Yeah. I have a lot of questions." "I know. And I am—" Her voice went briefly wrong and she steadied it. "I am going to need a very long time to work through some of them." "I know that too. But right now," she said, "I need you to tell me one thing. One thing first, before anything else." She pressed her hand flat against the case lid. "Are you safe?" The pause on the other end of the line was the longest of the night. "I'm safe," Elias said. "I've been safe for 2 years. I'm sorry it took me this long to tell." The gunshot came from the entrance of the row. Single shot, high caliber. The phone in Ivy's hand exploded. She was already moving. Roman's hand had pulled her sideways before the sound fully registered, hauling her behind the nearest unit door with the force of a man who has stopped calculating and is operating entirely on the imperative of keeping her alive. And the second shot hit the concrete where she'd been sitting and threw chips of it against her boots. Roman came up with his weapon. At the end of the row, backlit by the orange lamp, stood a silhouette. Medium height, medium build. Mild, reasonable face, now stripped of its mildness. Declan Ferris had not run. He had circled, and in his hand was a weapon considerably larger than anything he'd been visibly carrying, and his eyes were on Ivy with an expression that had finally dropped the mask entirely, and beneath it was nothing that could be called human in any of the ways that word is meant as a compliment. "The key," he said. "Take it out of the case and slide it toward me. Do it now, and we finish this quickly." Ivy looked at Roman. Roman was calculating. She could see it. The rapid assessment of distance and angles and the state of his ammunition and the injury in his side that had been making his right arm compensate for the last 20 minutes in ways that anyone watching carefully would have noticed. Ferris had been watching carefully. "I won't ask again," Ferris said. Roman looked at Ivy. and Ivy looked back at him, and in the orange misted dark of a Milwaukee storage facility at 4 in the morning, with her brother's voice still somehow in her ears, and her mother's case in her hands, and the key to 15 years of buried truth taped to its inside lid, she made a decision. She opened the case. "Ivy," Roman said. "Trust me," she said. She reached inside, her fingers found the key, and found the other thing taped beside it. The thing her mother had apparently decided to include alongside 15 years of documentation. The thing that Mara Hale, who had apparently known her daughter better than her daughter knew herself, had decided would be necessary. A second weapon. Small. Fully loaded. Ready. Ivy closed her fingers around it and looked up at Ferris and said very quietly, "You first." The shot Ferris fired went wide. Not by much. Wide enough. Ivy had moved the same instant she'd said "you first." Not standing up, not presenting herself as a target, but rolling sideways along the base of the unit doors with the small weapon in her hand and the case tucked against her ribs, moving away from Roman's position because two targets in separate directions were harder to track than two targets in the same place. And Ferris's eyes followed her for exactly the half second it took Roman to close 12 feet of concrete. He didn't shoot Ferris. He hit him, full force, shoulder into sternum, the collision loud and graceless and immediate, and both of them went into the unit door behind Ferris hard enough to buckle the lower panel. The weapon discharged into the roof. Roman got his hand on the weapon hand and bent it back, and the sound that followed was the sound of a joint reaching its limit. And Ferris made a noise that was not controlled or mild or reasonable, and the weapon hit the concrete and skittered toward Ivy's boots. She picked it up. She stood up. Ferris was on the ground with Roman's knee in his back and his arm at an angle arms were not designed for, and his face was against the wet concrete, and the mild expression was gone. And what was underneath it was pain and fury, and the specific humiliation of a man who has spent his entire professional life being the smartest person in the room and has just been outmaneuvered by a woman with a weapon her dead mother left her. Roman looked up at Ivy. His breathing was ragged. The wound in his side had opened. She could see the dark stain spreading through his shirt, larger than before, and his right arm was shaking slightly with the effort of holding Ferris down. And his face was pale in the orange mist light, with the particular pallor of a man running very close to empty. "Security team," he said. His voice was still even, barely. "Coming," she said. She had the radio from her jacket pocket. She relayed their position. She kept both weapons, her mother's and Ferris's, visible and ready, though Ferris had stopped struggling and seemed to have made his own assessment of the situation. The security man appeared at the end of the row 40 seconds later. Roman stood up slowly. Ivy watched him straighten and watched the cost of it move through his body. The controlled exhale, the deliberate squaring of his shoulders, the particular way he absorbed pain and rerouted it into something that looked like composure from a distance. She had spent 12 months living in the same house as this man, and had spent most of that time believing the composure was the truth of him. She understood now that it was the effort. The truth was underneath. The truth had been underneath the whole time. In a dead man's necklace kept in a wooden box, in a letter carried for 2 years, in a 4-digit code never used, in the specific sound his voice made when he'd said, "I don't know if I can," in a ruined study with rain coming through a blown-out wall. "Can you walk?" she said. "Yes." "Can you actually walk, or are you telling me you can walk?" He looked at her. "Both," he said. She handed Ferris's weapon to the security man and kept her mother's, and she put her free hand under Roman's arm, not dramatically, not tenderly, just practically, the way you support a structure that is functional but compromised. And they walked out of the third row, east side of the Milwaukee storage facility, into the orange-misted pre-dawn, with the case under Ivy's arm and the key against her palm and the necklace at her throat. And the sky to the east was the particular deep blue that happens in the 40 minutes before sunrise, when the dark begins losing its conviction. The drive back to Chicago took longer than 90 minutes because Roman needed a hospital and wouldn't go to one. He would go to a man he knew, he said, a doctor who operated in the specific category of medicine that served people who couldn't appear in emergency room records. Ivy did not argue about this because she had used up her arguing on things that mattered more, and because the wound, when she looked at it properly in the SUV's interior light, was serious but not immediately critical, and the man she knew had apparently dealt with worse. She sat in the back with Roman this time. The security man drove. Ferris was in the follow vehicle, secured, not speaking. Roman sat with his head back against the seat and his eyes mostly closed and his breathing the slow, deliberate rhythm of a man managing pain by controlling the space around it. Ivy sat beside him with the case on her lap and her shoulder against his and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "He's alive." Roman didn't open his eyes. "Yes." "You knew." A pause. "I suspected," Roman said, "for about 8 months. There were things that didn't add up about the ambush, details in the aftermath that were consistent with a staged death more than an actual one. I started following threads." His jaw tightened. "I found evidence that someone had been moved out of the country through a network I recognized. The profile matched. And you didn't tell me." "No. Because you weren't certain." "Because I wasn't certain," he said. "And because if I was wrong—" He stopped, opened his eyes, and looked at the ceiling of the SUV. "If I was wrong, I would have given you your brother back and then taken him away again. I wasn't willing to do that to you." Ivy considered this. "That was the right call," she said. Roman looked at her. "That one," she said. "The storage unit was not the right call, but that one was." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he closed his eyes again, and she felt the tension in his shoulder against hers change. Not disappear, but shift, the way weight shifts when something that has been held at arm's length is finally allowed to rest. They rode in silence the rest of the way. The doctor was in Pilsen, in a basement apartment accessible through a dry cleaning business that was real in all the ways a business needs to be real and served its secondary purpose quietly and without drama. He was 60 years old and moved with the efficiency of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by what people brought to his door in the early hours of the morning. He looked at Roman's side, asked 3 questions, answered none, and told Ivy to wait in the front room. She waited. She sat in a chair that had seen better decades, and she set the case on her knees, and she looked at it in the fluorescent light of a dry cleaning waiting room at 5 in the morning, and she thought about her mother. Mara Hale had been 34 years old when she died. Ivy had done this arithmetic before, had known since she was old enough to do it that her mother had been young, that the age gap between them was smaller than it seemed when you were a child, measuring adults in the units of old and not old. She had known it intellectually. She had not known it in her body until tonight, sitting with her mother's case in her lap, understanding that Mara Hale had made a decision at 34 that she had known would likely kill her, had made it anyway, had hidden the results of it in a storage unit under a name from her past life with a photograph taped to the wall and a weapon beside the evidence, as if she had seen her daughter coming through that door and had tried to be ready for her, as if she had trusted the daughter she'd never gotten to know with the things she'd died for. Ivy pressed her palm flat against the case lid. She thought about the photograph, the direct gaze, the expression that contained no uncertainty. She understood it now in a way she hadn't when she'd first seen it. It wasn't peace. It wasn't resignation. It was the expression of a woman who has made her calculation, who knows the cost, and who has decided that the cost does not change the answer. Ivy had made that same expression 3 times tonight. She was her mother's daughter. She hadn't known that until now. The doctor came out after 40 minutes and told her Roman would need 2 days of rest and antibiotics and to stay away from anyone trying to shoot him, which was advice she received with the specific deadpan of a person who has absorbed too much in the last 6 hours to respond to anything with full sincerity. He said Roman was asking for her. She went in. Roman was on the examination table with his shirt off and a clean bandage across his right side and the cut on his cheekbone redressed. And he looked, stripped of the dress shirt and the operational composure, like a man who had simply been awake too long and taken too much damage and was running on the last of something that didn't have a clinical name. He looked, she thought, entirely human. She sat in the chair beside the table. "Ferris," he said, "your man has him. He's not going anywhere. The federal contact on the drive, the case number." Roman's voice was slower than usual, the pain medication doing what it was designed to do. "It's real. I verified it at the estate. If the safe deposit box us—" "It's real," she said. "The key is real. My mother was real." She held his gaze. "We'll deal with the safe deposit box when you can stand up without it costing you something." Roman looked at her. "I can stand up now." "You cannot stand up now." "Ivy." "Roman." She leaned forward, elbows on her knees. I need you to do something you have not done once in the entire time I have known you. He waited. I need you to stop, she said. Just for a few hours. Stop managing and stop calculating and stop deciding things on behalf of people who didn't ask you to. The case is here. The key is here. Ferris is secured. Your federal contact is real. Everything will still be true in 4 hours. She held his eyes. Stop. A long silence. I don't know how to do that, he said. I know, she said. Do it anyway. He looked at the ceiling. He breathed. He stopped. She sat with him until the medication pulled him under, which took less time than she expected, and told her how depleted he actually was beneath the management of it. She sat for a while after that, in the dry cleaning basement in Pilsen, listening to him breathe, watching the particular quality of a face in sleep, unguarded in a way it never was awake, stripped of even the involuntary defenses that a person carries without knowing. He looked younger. She thought about a man who had built a fake employment agency and bought out a trafficking contract and kept a letter for 730 days and known a code he never used because using it meant letting go of the only thing that made the keeping bearable. She thought about the specific texture of that loneliness, the kind that disguises itself as protection, the kind that tells itself it is serving someone else while quietly, incrementally, serving itself. She was not going to forgive him quickly. She was going to forgive him. Those were different things, and she was old enough and tired enough to know the difference. She picked up the case and she went into the waiting room and she called the number. It rang 4 times. Then Elias said, Ivy. She closed her eyes. I need you to tell me everything, she said. From the beginning, all of it. I know. And I need you to understand that when you're done, I'm going to be very angry with you for a significant period of time. I know that too. And then after that, she said, I'm going to need to see you. His exhale was long and slightly unsteady. Tell me when and where, he said. I'll be there. She opened her eyes. Outside the small window above the waiting room chairs, the sky had gone from deep blue to the first pale gray of actual morning. Not sunrise yet, but the precursor to it, the light that comes before light, the intimation of day before day commits to itself. Tell me what happened in Calumet City, she said. And her brother began to talk. The truth when it came was not clean. The truths that cost the most never are. Elias had been alive because the ambush had not been as total as Roman believed. He had been hit. The recording was real. The injury was real. The sound of a gunshot was real. But the shot had not been fatal. In the chaos of the ambush's aftermath, with 3 of Roman's men down, and the counter-response coming in and bodies being moved and the scene being cleared in the rapid, brutal way of men who needed to be somewhere else, Elias had been pulled out by a woman named Carla Reyes, a federal agent who had been embedded inside the Volkov Midwest cell for 16 months, and who had been waiting for a moment when she could extract him without burning her own cover. Carla Reyes had made a calculation. The calculation was this: Elias Hale alive and hidden was more useful than Elias Hale dead and mourned, because Elias Hale alive had 16 months of intelligence in his head and a direct line to Roman Versetti's organization, and the case she was building needed both. The calculation also was, telling Roman Versetti that his informant was alive would expose the extraction, burn Reyes's cover, and end the federal investigation prematurely. So Elias had stayed dead. For 2 years. He had stayed dead and watched, through channels Reyes controlled, the aftermath of his own absence. He had watched Ivy get placed in the Blackthorn estate through a constructed employment agency and had understood what Roman was doing and had trusted it. Had trusted it because he had asked Roman to protect her and Roman was protecting her in the only way he knew how, which was thoroughly and completely and at the cost of everything else. He had watched Roman carry the letter. He had watched the safe deposit box remain unclaimed. He had understood. From a distance of 2 years, and the particular clarity that distance and near-death provide, what was happening between the man he'd trusted and the sister he'd spent his adult life trying to save, and he had felt complicated things about it that he was going to need more than one conversation to fully unpack. She was ours, Ivy said when he reached the part about their mother. She was doing all of it, and we were in the foster system, and she didn't know it would happen that fast, Elias said. She thought she had more time. She thought she'd hidden us well enough that they wouldn't use us as leverage. His voice was careful. She was wrong about that. She was right about everything else. The case. The original documentation is in that safe deposit box, he said. Reyes has been waiting for it for 4 years. With Ferris in custody and the financial records from the drive and the original documentation, the case closes. The whole structure, Midwest Cell, Eastern Seaboard legacy accounts, the financial network that's been running for 25 years, it closes. And Mikhail Volkov. Reyes has enough on Mikhail specifically to put him away without the documentation. The documentation closes the legacy case, his father's case, the one your mother, he stopped, the one Mom died for. Ivy was quiet for a moment. It closes, she said. It closes, Elias said. She pressed her palm against the case again. Where are you? She said. He told her. He was in a safe house in Toronto that Reyes had maintained for 2 years, and he had been waiting for this phone call with the specific patience of a man who has had 2 years to practice patience and has not entirely made peace with it. He asked about Roman's condition with the careful neutrality of someone who has complicated feelings about a situation and has chosen to lead with the practical rather than the emotional. She told him. There was a silence. Then Elias said, "He kept the letter." "He kept everything," Ivy said. Another silence. "I asked him to love you," Elias said. "I didn't ask him to." He stopped. "I didn't specify any particular method." "No," Ivy said. "You didn't." "Are you—" "I don't know yet," she said. "Ask me in 6 months." "Okay?" A pause. "Ivy." "Yeah. I'm sorry for all of it. For not being there. For the 2 years. For all of it." She looked at the ceiling. "I know," she said. "Are you going to forgive me?" "Ask me in 6 months," she said. "Same answer." He made a sound that was part exhale and part something else. The specific sound of a person who has been carrying a weight for a long time and has just felt the first small increment of it shift. "Okay?" he said. "Elias?" "Yeah. I'm glad you're not dead." His voice, when it came, was very unsteady. "Me too," he said. She ended the call. She sat in the waiting room chair with the case on her lap and the key in her hand and her mother's necklace around her throat and the gun on the chair beside her, and she let the morning come at the pace it intended to come, which was slow and gray and entirely indifferent to what had happened in the hours before it. That was fine. That was, she thought, what mornings were for. Roman slept for 4 hours and woke to find Ivy sitting beside the examination table in the same chair with the case on her knees and her eyes open and her face carrying the specific quality of someone who has thought a great many things through and is not finished but has reached a place where stopping is possible. He looked at her. She looked back. "Elias is in Toronto," she said. "He's been alive for 2 years. There's a federal agent named Carla Reyes who runs the organized crime case and who extracted him from the Calumet City scene. He's a material witness. When we deliver the documentation from the safe deposit box, the case closes." She held his gaze. "All of it. Your organization's exposure, the trafficking contracts, the Volkov legacy accounts, all of it." Roman absorbed this. "Toronto," he said. "Toronto. He's been alive for 2 years." "Yes." Roman looked at the ceiling. He breathed in slowly and let it out, and in that exhalation was something she'd been watching him hold for a very long time. 2 years of a dead man's weight, the specific gravity of a promise made in blood to someone dying, the guilt that calcifies when you survive something you weren't supposed to survive alone. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't." "If I had known—" "Roman." She waited until he looked at her. "He's alive. That's the fact that matters right now. Everything else is—" She paused. "Everything else we deal with one thing at a time." He looked at her for a long moment. "The storage unit," he said. "I should have gone. 2 years ago, I should have—" "Yes," she said. "You should have." He held her gaze. He didn't explain it again. He'd explained it once, and she'd heard it, and she didn't need to hear it again, and he understood that. He looked at her with the direct, undefended look of a man who has run out of management strategies and has decided that this particular truth does not get to live behind glass anymore. I know what I did, he said. I know you know, she said. That's actually... She stopped, something crossing her face. That's actually most of what I needed. The morning was full gray now, the fluorescent light in the basement room competing with the daylight coming through the high window, and Roman looked worse in the honest light than he had in the dark. The cut, the pallor, the cost of the night written plainly across everything. He also looked more real than she had ever seen him. She set the case on the floor. She leaned forward in the chair. She put her hand over the bandage on his side, very lightly, just the warmth of her palm through the gauze. And she looked at him, and she said, "You're going to have to learn how to let me make my own choices. I know. Even when you think you know better. Especially then. And you're going to have to stop carrying things alone and calling it protection." His jaw moved. "That's harder." "I know," she said. "I know it's harder. I'm telling you to do it anyway." She held his gaze. "Because I'm not interested in being something you manage. I'm interested in being someone you actually..." She stopped for a second, something moving through her face. "Someone you talk to." Roman looked at her hand on his side. Then he put his hand over hers. "I'll try," he said. His voice was rough. "That's the right answer," she said. They stayed like that for a while, not speaking, not needing to. The room was quiet, and the morning was coming, and outside the dry cleaning business on a Pilsen side street was starting the particular gentle noise of a neighborhood waking up. A delivery truck, a door, someone's radio from an apartment above. And none of it knew anything about what had happened in the hours before dawn, and that was right and appropriate. The world didn't need to know. The world just needed to continue. She drove them to the safe deposit bank herself because Roman's right arm was not up to the specific task of Chicago traffic, and he knew it and allowed it without extended discussion, which she noted as progress. The bank opened at 9. They were there at 8:45, Ivy in the clothes she'd put on the night before, and Roman in a jacket borrowed from the doctor that was slightly too large across the shoulders, and they sat in the car in the bank parking lot in the gray morning and waited for the doors to open. "I want to be the one who opens it," Ivy said. "Okay," Roman said. "I don't need you to, Ivy, I said okay." She looked at him. "I know," he said. "I'm learning." She allowed herself one small thing that was not quite a smile and was adjacent to it. The safe deposit box was registered under Mara Hale's original name and accessed with the key and identification that Ivy carried in the form of a birth certificate she'd had since she was 17. One of the only documents she'd managed to hold on to across the years of being moved. The single continuous thread of official proof that she existed and had a mother who had named her and had chosen the name deliberately. The bank manager, to his credit, did not visibly react to any aspect of their appearance. The box was brought to a private room. Ivy opened it alone. Roman waited outside. Inside the box, 4 sealed document envelopes, a USB drive, a handwritten inventory of contents, and beneath all of it, a small sealed envelope with one word on the front in her mother's handwriting, Ivy. She picked it up. She turned it over. She did not open it in the bank room. She put it in the inside pocket of her jacket, against her chest, and she picked up the inventory and she read it, and she confirmed that what was here was what Elias had described. The original documentation, the financial records, the testimony transcripts, the chain of custody that had been built by a 34-year-old woman who had known what she was building it toward and had built it completely anyway. She put everything back in the box, and she called Carla Reyes. The federal agent answered on the second ring. She answered on the second ring as if she had been waiting for the call, which she had been... Elias had told her it was coming, and Carla Reyes was the kind of woman who was already in position before the call came. Her voice was flat and professional and carried under it the particular quality of someone who has been working toward a specific conclusion for 4 years and can now hear it in the distance. They arranged the transfer of the documentation. They arranged Ferris's formal custody. They arranged Elias's return. When Ivy came out of the private room, Roman was standing in the corridor with his back against the wall and his eyes on the door and his hands still at his sides. And when she came through the doorway, he looked at her with an expression she had no single word for. Relief, and something older than relief. The the specific combination of exhaustion and completion that belongs to a long thing finally ending. "Done," she said. He exhaled. "Reyes takes formal custody this afternoon," Ivy said. "Elias flies in tomorrow morning." She looked at him steadily. "You need to be there. When he lands. Whatever is between you two. You need to be there." Roman looked at the floor. "He might not want—" "He wants," she said. "I spoke to him for 2 hours this morning. He wants." She paused. "What happened in Calumet City was not yours to carry alone. He knows that. He's known it." Another pause. "He also knows about the storage unit." Roman's eyes came up. "I told him," she said. "He needs to know the full truth. That was the deal." A long silence. "What did he say?" Roman said. "He said—" Ivy stopped. She thought about the specific silence on the phone when she'd told Elias about the code, the 4-digit code, 730 days untouched. She thought about what Elias had finally said after that silence, his voice careful and worn and honest in the way it always was when he was saying something he'd thought about for a long time. He said he understood it. He said he didn't forgive it. He said he was going to need time. She held Roman's gaze. "He said you should be there when he lands." Roman stood with this for a moment. Then he nodded. One nod, carrying more weight than most words. They left the bank at 10:15. The gray morning had resolved itself into a day that was pale and cold and clean, the kind of November day that had shed the rain and was offering instead the particular stark clarity of bare trees and pale sky and ground that was damp but settled. Chicago in the late morning going about its business in the unsentimental way of a city that has seen everything and has decided that moving forward is simply what forward means. Roman drove this time. His right arm had recovered enough for city speeds, and he needed, Ivy understood, the specific control of being the one with his hands on the wheel. She understood this about him now. She didn't need to agree with it to understand it. They were on the Eisenhower when he said, "What was in the letter?" She knew which letter he meant. Her hand went to the inside pocket of her jacket. "I haven't opened it yet," she said. He glanced at her. "I'll open it when I'm ready," she said. "When I'm somewhere quiet, and I have enough time to do it properly." She looked at the highway moving under them. She was 34. "I want to read it when I've thought enough about what that means." Roman said nothing. He drove. After a while, "She would have liked you," he said. "Your brother talks about her the same way you move through rooms. Same precision, same refusal to be something that the situation requires instead of what you actually are." Ivy looked at him. "You talked to him about her," she said. He talked. I listened. A pause. It was what he needed, someone to tell it to. She looked at the road. "You're better at that than you think you are," she said. "The listening. I'm better at managing than listening." "You are," she agreed. "But underneath the managing." She paused. "Underneath it, you actually hear things. You just don't let yourself respond to them." Roman's hand shifted slightly on the wheel. "That's something I can work on," he said. "Good," she said. They came off the highway into the near west side, and the morning moved around them, ordinary and continuous, and requiring nothing of them except that they be present in it, which was, Ivy thought, the most demanding thing the world ever actually asked of anyone. Be present, keep moving. Let the night be what it was, and let the morning be what it is, and understand that the distance between those two things is not a failure or a betrayal or a forgetting. It is just time, doing what time does, which is continuing whether or not you're ready for it. She was ready for it. She was exhausted and sore and carrying things she would need months to fully set down, and she was ready for it. The Blackthorn estate looked different in daylight. That was her first thought when Roman turned through the gates, that she had lived here for 12 months and had moved through it every day, and had never quite seen it the way she saw it now, coming back to it after the night that had happened inside it. The damage was visible from the drive, the blown exterior panel on the east wing, the shattered upper window, the places where the night had left its marks on stone and glass. Maintenance would come. The marks would be covered. She knew what was under them now. She got out of the car. Roman came around the front of it and stopped beside her, and they stood in the drive and looked at the building, and the morning was cold on their faces and honest about everything. "I'm not staying," she said. Roman looked at her. Not yet, she said. I need... She paused, finding the right words. I need some time that isn't inside these walls. I need to be somewhere where I make the choices about how the day goes, and nobody has decided anything in advance. She turned to look at him. I need that for a while. Okay, he said. I'll come back, she said. Okay? I'm not saying I won't. I'm saying I need the time first. Ivy. His voice was quiet and direct and carried none of the management. I heard you. Take the time. Take what you need. He held her gaze. I will be here. She looked at him. This man who had made terrible choices for the right reasons and right choices for complicated reasons, and who had stood between her and everything that wanted her gone for 2 years without ever asking for credit and without ever telling her the truth. This man who had a cut on his face and a wound in his side and a dead man's promise in his chest that he'd kept in every way he knew how and one way he should have known better. This man who had kissed her in a ruined study like a person being forgiven. She stepped forward. She put her palm flat against his chest. The same gesture, the same place, the scar she'd pressed her hand against in the war room floor at the beginning of all of this. His heart was beating, steady, alive, present. I know, she said. That's why I'm coming back. She took her hand back. She picked up the case. She walked to her car, her own car, the one she'd bought on her first month's salary from a job that hadn't been real, but whose paycheck had been one of the many layers of Roman's construction that had been both lie and genuine simultaneously. And she put the case in the passenger seat and the key in the ignition. She looked at the envelope in her jacket pocket. Her mother's handwriting, one word. She thought, when I'm ready. She started the car. In the rear-view mirror, Roman stood in the drive with his hands in his jacket pockets and his face in the cold November light. And he watched her go without moving, without following, without deciding anything on her behalf. He stood there until she was through the gate. She watched the gate close in the mirror. Then she looked at the road ahead and she drove. And the morning opened in front of her, pale and cold and entirely hers. And the city was the city, and the day was the day. And somewhere in Toronto her brother was alive, and somewhere in a Pilsen basement a federal case was closing, and somewhere in the inside pocket of her jacket a woman who had been 34 years old had left a letter for a daughter she'd trusted to arrive eventually. Ivy drove. She drove until she found a park, a small one. The kind that exists in city neighborhoods not as a destination but as a pause, benches and bare trees and a path that went nowhere in particular. She parked. She sat for a moment with the engine off and the morning quiet around her. She reached into her jacket. She took out the envelope. She held it in both hands for a long time. Then she opened it. The paper inside was folded once. The handwriting was the same as the photograph caption. Neat, unhurried, written by someone who was not in a hurry, who had made her decision and was not second-guessing it. It was not long. It was exactly as long as it needed to be. And Ivy Hale sat in her car in a small Chicago park on a cold November morning and read what her mother had left for her, and let herself, finally, completely, and without any audience at all, come apart and come back together in the same long exhale, the way things do when they've been held too tightly for too long and are finally allowed to simply be what they are. The trees were bare. The sky was pale. The city moved around her, indifferent and continuous. She was 31 years old, and she was the last of the Hales, and she was her mother's daughter, and she was no one's property and no one's project and no one's secret, and she was alive. And in 6 hours, her brother was going to call her again, and in 24 hours, he was going to land in Chicago. And in some unspecified future that was entirely and completely her own to define, she was going to decide what she wanted, and then she was going to do it. That was enough. That was, she thought, looking up at the pale November sky through the windshield of a car she had bought with her own money. More than enough. It was everything.